Here we go. We're live on video for the first time ever.
Hey, Jeff, on video. Seems like we're on a Zoom call.
A much crisper Zoom call. Yeah, how's it going? Heard you were just coming off a big flight.
Red-eye flight. So the best time to do your first ever video podcast, right, is right fresh off the plane, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, if it's any consolation, even in HD, you look like $1 million.
I feel like 1,000, but let's make it happen. Welcome to the Wellable Weekly Podcast, where we talk about key topics and trends at the intersection of well-being, technology, and HR. I'm Nick, along with my good friend Jeff. Jeff, have you heard the saying, any publicity is good publicity?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Well, I think this article may question that as a premise. In short, it's about a company called Google, which I think everyone knows. And it's a lawsuit a former employee of Google is filing against the company. In short, this employee had a manager who he claims urged the team, himself included, to be open about their mental health challenges. And when this individual decided to do that with their manager, things kind of turned sour. The work relationship wasn't great. It eventually culminated in him leaving the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting article. I mean, all about this gentleman, Jeff with a J, Sklarin, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Was with Google for 8 years, so longer tenured employee, right? Account strategist, so in sales, seemingly a top performer, rose through the ranks, great performance reviews. Like you said, has a new manager, starts to report to him. Seemingly things go well for the first few months, and then they have that team meeting, all about the importance of empathy, which again, on the surface level, sounds like a good initiative. But as you mentioned, things just really took a turn. After this manager said to Jeff and the whole team, "Hey, feel free, come to me with any mental health challenges that you might be having." Jeff disclosed to him that he had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And after that conversation where he disclosed that, the tone of their subsequent interactions just really changed in a way where Jeff felt like the manager was really being just harder on him, right? Like questioning his ability to do the job, handle the stress, and giving feedback that wasn't always constructive. So gets to the point where a couple months in, Jeff takes FMLA leave and short-term disability. He comes back and he gets his most negative performance review in those 8 years at Google. And he's also threatened with a PIP, a performance improvement plan, common in the sales world. But what's interesting about this is Jeff had just hit 93% of his revenue target, which again, not sure the inner workings of Google's sales function and their KPIs, but if you have somebody who's pretty close to hitting 100% of their target, it's just hard to imagine how that individual qualifies for a PIP, unless, again, there's something missing here. It just doesn't really kind of seem to add up.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, when you're performing at 93%, it's just hard to see that there's not some type of red flag there. But if you're this employee, the question is, what do you do? So he went to HR, and according to the court filing, he says that HR dismissed his concerns as he said, she said. Not sure what to read into that. Maybe a lot of these conversations were had verbally, right, or over Zoom or something, and they weren't documented in emails, which makes it hard for an HR person to really understand what happened. You have one person saying one story, another person saying another story. Both of these people don't have a history of raising complaints or having complaints raised against them. So it's just a challenging place for HR to be in. And I think almost every HR person probably has some situation, whether it's related to mental health or something else, that they can relate to that's like this. When he realized he wasn't getting anywhere with HR, he decided to go to his doctor. His doctor gave him a recommendation to change managers as a reasonable accommodation. Google has a formal, accommodations team, and according to the filing, reportedly they called it as non-standard and denied it. So he was, a little bit lost again. Eventually, the employee relations investigation team came in, and they eventually did an investigation and concluded that there wasn't anything to really substantiate his claims. Again, this could just be a function of, lack of messages, lack of emails, and things like that. So the employee's out of options. Eventually, he'll part ways with the company. He files a suit under Title VII of the ADA, and he's seeking four things: back pay, compensatory damages, punitive damages, and what the last one I find really interesting is reinstatement. And I don't know what to make of that other than it seems odd. Even if he gets reinstated, certainly he's not going to be with the same manager, but it still seems odd for you to have gone through HR, multiple teams within the company, not got the resolution you wanted, and still feel compelled to want to be reinstated uh, into that company and job. Um, what I want to focus on is like, what's the takeaway here? Whether you're Google or another company, like, what do you learn from this? And the first thing that comes to mind for me is training really matters. And training also has limitations, right? And so every person, managers included, have bias. And this strikes me as a situation where workplace health initiatives, in this case, mental health initiatives, collide with managerial bias. And no matter how much you train an individual, they are going to make mistakes or they're going to deliver your ideal response non-uniformly. And that's really, really hard to do. And so I'm guessing Google has training and things like that. We also don't know exactly how this individual, this manager, interacted or responded, but it's really, really challenging. What I do know is that if you encourage employees to disclose their health condition, either very explicitly, as in I have anxiety or I have depression, or like in a very nebulous way, like I'm just not feeling mentally well today, both of those to varying degrees have very serious consequences and very serious responsibilities. And to presume at a company as large as Google that every manager is going to handle that situation perfectly is a little bit hopeful, I think.
Yeah, I would think. And I mean, it kind of comes down, like you mentioned, training is a huge part of that. But even going a level up, the policy itself that's set is so critical, right? And I think that's what's not totally clear, from the article is what exactly was that policy that Google was communicating to this manager to bring to his team? Is it that he was supposed to really encourage them to talk openly about mental health challenges? If that's the case, and it wasn't backed up by the level of training and rigor and communication that would be really necessary to handle such a sensitive topic, then that policy was kind of faulty from the start. Or if it's the actions of that manager, whether through misinterpretation or misapplication of a policy, where they're freelancing a little bit and kind of taking a policy that's meant more for developing trust with your team and providing them with support, maybe even just directing them to resources that Google has. I have to imagine that a company of Google's stature and the way that they try to provide really compelling benefits, compensation, overall employee experiences. I have to imagine that they have ample mental health resources with trained professionals, platforms, apps, things that you can connect with individuals who are really certified to do that. And again, in a private space, not necessarily maybe having some of those explicit conversations with your manager, where those tracks of performance and how you're feeling about your job, how you're feeling about your personal life can get intertwined in a way that is really complicated. Again, when not done well and thoughtfully and without bias, which to your point is almost impossible to achieve across the thousands of managers that Google probably has.
Yeah, I mean, I would double click on that. I think if I were an employer, right, and in the case I am, in the case of working at Wellable today, I think you try to implement policies because they can be delivered uniformly. Like you noted, in case of Google, they have way more resources to deliver way more policies than maybe any company, on this planet. But every employer is going to have to figure out what those policies are. Some of them are more costly than others. Some of them, are easy to implement. Some are harder, but you got to figure out what those are and try to implement those because those get delivered uniformly. If you allow everyone to get a mental health day just because they just need a break, no questions asked, that's something that you can do that every manager is going to have to abide by because it's in an employee handbook. It's very clearly stated, right? If you offer really rich mental health benefits in your health plan, employees can go out and seek those benefits, without having to talk to their manager and things of that nature. And so, If you do that, you try to address as much of this mental health challenge in the workplace as possible through policies that can be delivered uniformly. And then the last mile is inevitably going to have to be addressed by hopefully trained managers. And you just have to expect that there's going to be some latitude in terms of how they address it. Maybe you have policies around when someone approaches you, try to do better documentation. Like that could be something. I think that level of formality may not be conducive to really building trust, but maybe it's required from like a legal perspective. The last thing I will end on is, part of the core filings, we hear one side of the story, right, which is the claimant. I don't think we're going to hear the Google side, right? Maybe we will. I just don't see Google going out there and like not settling this case and having the whole process, discovery and court filings, having this thing linger on for years while they try to get it resolved.
Yeah, that's probably a fair prediction. Well, with that, let's conclude another successful episode of the Wellable Weekly podcast. As always, thanks, Nick, and for all those listeners out there, feel free to subscribe to Wellable Weekly, our newsletter, to get updates, including articles like the one we talked about today, and more free resources from Wellable. And you can also subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.